Have you ever had to make a split-second decision? You know, when the pressure's on, did you make the right decision or the wrong decision? Well, today I want to tell you about a couple of decisions that I had to make recently on a road trip. One was, I'd consider, a quick decision, and the other one truly was a split-second decision, but both had huge impacts on my life and the life of my family. So you may have seen my road trip video to the Twisted Sisters in the hill country of Texas. Twisted Sisters, in case you don't know, are three famous motorcycle roads. They're about 4 or 5 hours south of where I live in North Texas. I'd been planning this trip for several weeks, and the video that was going to be produced from that trip as well. And since the video was being sponsored by my friends at Dairyland Insurance, I wanted to get some unique footage from that trip, so that added into my plans for the trip. So my original plan for that trip was to have my wife drive in her car and follow me while I was riding on the motorcycle. That way I could use her car to mount up some cameras on it, and I could get some unique footage that I wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And she could carry some extra equipment that would be more difficult for me to carry on the motorcycle if I was going just by myself or if she was with me on the motorcycle. The night before the trip, I'd place some mounts on the car to get it ready for the cameras that I would place on it the next day. I had the car loaded up with the equipment I needed and all my stuff packed in there. I had the motorcycle packed fairly lightly because I didn't need all the room on it because I could keep it all in the car. So we got up early the next morning, ready for the trip. And at the last second, something came up that my wife needed to stay home for. Now, she was really bothered by this sudden change of plans and was trying to figure out how she could still go on the trip and deal with the issue that she needed to deal with. So we were standing in the kitchen and had been discussing it for some time when I finally just said, I've got to go now. I had a reservation and I had a plan that I had to follow through on, and I've got to leave now so I can get there before nightfall. I said, let's pull everything from the car. We'll get it out of the car. We'll get it loaded on the motorcycle, but I got to get out on the road. And we were both really looking forward to this trip, so we were both disappointed that she couldn't go. But I felt better about her staying behind to handle the situation than being distracted by it the entire time we were out on the road. So some reorganizing, repacking, and I had everything I needed for the trip packed up on the Indian Challenger, and I hit the road a few hours later than what I had intended on. It was a quick decision, and one that we both agreed later that night on the phone was the right decision, but I wouldn't understand how important that decision was until later on in the trip. So I rode the Twisted Sisters. I was out there for a few days, and I got a lot of footage. I got back on the bike a few days later on my trip home, and my goal was to avoid the major highways as much as possible on the road home. And to be honest, I don't know where I was when this next event happened. I was on some 2-lane road. It was almost entirely void of other cars. It was about 10 in the morning, and I would pass a car, every 5 minutes or so that was going in the opposite direction. The view was wide open, and I could see for a long distance up the road. And as I was heading up the road at about 75 miles per hour, I saw a pickup off in the distance. As I was watching that truck, it drifted over into the center line and then swerved back to its own lane. And I remember thinking, man, what was that? I then thought that there must have been something in that lane that the truck was avoiding, but I was paying close attention to the truck from this point on. So we continued to approach each other with no other cars anywhere to be seen when the truck again started slowly drifting across the center line. I rolled off the throttle, probably decelerating from 75 miles per hour down to around 50, and that truck continued to move over into my lane. So there was really nowhere else to go on this road. It was a slight drop off this 2-lane road. There was some really loose grass and gravel right there, and then there was a fence, right on the outside of that. At this point, 2 of the truck's tires had completely crossed the center line, and it continued to slowly drift in my direction. I kept thinking, he's going to see me, he's going to get back over, he's going to see me, he's going to get back over. But he continued to drift and was not slowing down any at the least. By the time he got in front of me, he had all 4 tires completely in my lane, so he was totally over the center line, and he was still drifting slightly in my direction. I was riding on the very ragged edge of the road, and I was trying to decide if I could stay on the road or if I needed to drop off the side of the road and take my chances there. Thankfully, there was enough room for me to stay on the road and avoid the truck, but I was hit with a big blast of wind as it passed by as a reminder of how bad that could have been. So I watched the truck in my mirror as it continued to drift across the lane until it almost ran off the side of the highway on my side of the highway, and then the driver swerved back into his lane. It didn't swerve back until it was quite a ways after it had passed me, so it stayed back, in my lane for a considerable portion of time. I never looked up to see the driver of the truck, so I'm not sure if he was falling asleep, if he was distracted, or if he was intoxicated. I was looking intently at the side of the road, and I was trying to get every inch out of that road that I possibly could. So there was a picnic area ahead not too far after this incident. I pulled off the road to regather my thoughts and get a drink of water. As I was sitting on the picnic bench and thinking about what had happened, I thought, man, there was only enough room for a motorcycle to get through there. If I'd been any wider than that, I wouldn't have made it through, and that would have been bad. It was then that I remembered the original plan for this trip. Until a few minutes before this trip, the plan was for my wife to follow me in her car. Had she been following me, she would have been on a collision course for a head-on collision with this truck. There was room for me to get through on the motorcycle, but not room for her to get through in her car. Sometimes things happen and we don't understand at the time why they're happening like that. Like my wife not being able to go on this trip at the last minute. And it's later that we understand that it's the providence of God that protected my family from this tragedy. But I do know I will be eternally thankful that my wife missed out on the trip to the Texas Hill Country, because otherwise it could have been disastrous for both of us. There's another aspect to this story as well. I saw that truck swerving well up the road, so I was hyper aware of that truck as it approached. As it approached and continued to drift, I made a plan. I didn't fixate on the truck. I looked where I wanted the motorcycle to be. I stayed as far to the edge of my lane as I could possibly get, and if I needed to, I'd run off the road and take my chances on the side of the road. But my road skills allowed me to ride the jagged edge of that road and pass within just a few feet to spare and avoid a fatal collision. I'll never claim to be the best rider in the world. There are better riders out there than me, but there were 3 things that protected me and my family that day: road skills, road strategy, and the grace of God. And I can highly recommend you looking into all 3. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. There's a whole lot more to MCrider than just the weekly videos. Go to mcrider.com/member. Get access to all the resources that make MCrider one of the best places on the web for people who love motorcycles and want to get better at riding them.